How many times do we hear about climate change without stopping to think about what it means for us? I mean, not for governments or large companies or politicians, for us. If someone had asked me about it at the beginning of the semester, I probably would have talked about renewable energy, electric vehicles, or reducing emissions. And even when those ideas weren't wrong, they were incomplete. What I did not realize was that sustainability was connected to almost every aspect of my life, like the things I buy, the way I consume information, or the decisions I make every day. My name is Tilio Ramirez Rodriguez, and this video is a reflection on how my understanding about sustainability and climate change and my own responsibility has evolved throughout this semester. And for this reflection, I will be using Robert Swartz's metacognition questions, which basically will be guiding about what have I learned, how have I learned it, what has challenged me the most, how can I improve, and how I will be using this knowledge to improve my community. And this is really helpful because it will allow me to look back and see how my perspective has changed and evolved. And precisely this will guide my future decisions as a person, as a consumer, as a citizen, and as a future professional. And precisely the first place where I noticed these changes was in my own daily life. Because when we calculated our ecological footprint at the beginning of the semester, I expected to find areas for improvement, but I didn't expect to realize how many of my daily habits had a measurable environmental impact. And as a consequence to this ecological footprint, I started to implement small actions like improve my laundry efficiency or reduce my usage for certain things like air conditioner, and my motorcycle and the dryer, and in general become more conscious about my consumption habits. And this was the easiest part, like to be aware of the things I needed to do and the actions I needed to implement, but it became real hard when I noticed that I needed real consistency, because it is easy to agree to these sustainability practices in theory, but not so easy when you see that they exist certain routines that have been existed for years, and this requires real commitment. And precisely I think one thing I can still improve is being more consistent with these habits and continuing to educate myself about sustainability beyond this course. And I think this process helped me a lot, like to understand something important, that climate change is a global problem, but it is built from millions of individual decisions. And even when my actions alone probably won't solve it, they shape the type of society and the future I will contribute to create. But I didn't only change the way I look at my daily habits, it also has changed the way I look at engineering in general. For example, as a mechatronics engineering student, I was looking for something that would change the way some things work and with that try to reduce emissions. But now I understand that it is more important to see that every product, component or machine has its environmental cost because of the resources it requires. And that's why it's more useful to see the way to improve efficiency, not only to reduce cost or time, but to reduce the resources some things require. And this became especially clear during our project about biodiversity collapse in Papua, Indonesia, because when we started to see the problem just as deforestation, it was only an isolated problem. But as we advanced through the different phases of the project, I realized that it involved much more than environmental damage. And then we analyzed the relationships between governments, companies, indigenous communities, and other actors like consumers or international markets. And with the network map, we understood that this wasn't an isolated problem. It was a systemic problem that involves a lot of other factors, a lot of instruments, and has some consequences, its impacts. And that's why probably that's the most important thing I learned, that there are some systemic problems that really had a lot of causes, and I changed my perspective from what is causing the problem to how are all of these factors connected. And it's also useful to understand that solving technical problems is important, but we have to consider the human and the environmental impacts of those solutions because it is equally important. And this is something I would like to apply in future projects. Whenever I design or evaluate or implement a solution, I want to consider not only its technical performance, but also its environmental and social consequences. And in that sense, sustainability is no longer something separate from engineering for me. More, it has become part of the way I understand my profession. And as my understanding expanded, I started to question myself for my role beyond the classroom. For example, as I said earlier, I thought climate change was only an environmental issue, but now I see that there are more social and political and economical implications. For example, in our case with the Papua project, there were some actors that were being ignored, like the indigenous communities whose lives depend on what happens to the forests. And this made the problem much more human and less abstract and helped us empathize more with these communities. And the other key learning was that every message is built from different perspectives. For example, governments and companies and scientists and academic communities describe one same problem in very different ways, and each perspective highlights some aspects and really helps us understand the problems that are very complex. And this also taught me that I need to investigate more, compare information, compare arguments, compare perspectives, and not only take the first information I got from certain website, for example. And I think that drove me to be more responsible as a citizen. I need to stay informed, I need to participate more in discussions, and use social media not only as entertainment, but really inform myself better and support decisions based on evidence rather than convenience. Perhaps the biggest surprise came from a place that I really would question myself. That is my role as a consumer and my consumption habits. Because before learning about greenwashing, I generally assumed that if a company promoted itself as sustainable or eco-friendly or responsible, I thought those claims were probably true. However, this course showed me that sustainability can sometimes become a marketing strategy rather than a genuine commitment, and precisely this lesson with Mario was really helpful and helped me to differentiate before greenwashing, greenhushing, greenwishing, and opacity. And now I can I ask myself before buying a product questions like who's promoting it, what evidence could it be skipping, what should I need to know to really verify that this product is sustainable. And I think that that shift in my perspective is one of the most valuable practical lessons I will get from this course. And as a result of that, I see that I now pay more attention to the products I buy and the companies I support. And even when I have a lot to improve, I think now I make better consumption decisions and more consciously than at the beginning of the semester. And I also recognize that even when these consumption and lifestyle habits that I have are causes of the problem, I see that I can be a part of the solutions too with the decisions I can make as a consumer, citizen, and future engineer. Looking back, I can clearly see how much my understanding has changed. Before all of this, I really have a more technical concept about sustainability, but now I see it includes other aspects like citizenship, ethics of consumption, sustainability, social responsibility, biodiversity, etc. And these are really complex problems that affects all of us, not only a few, and therefore we all have certain degree of responsibility. And also see my progress in each dimension helps me to have a more complete perspective. For example, personally, I learned that small actions matter. Professionally, that engineering solutions must consider social and environmental consequences. As a citizen, I think I'm more critical when thinking and learning new things. And as a consumer, I learned to question what I buy and the messages I receive from advertisements. And all of these lessons really changed my perspective because we need informed citizens, we need responsible consumers, we need ethical professionals, and critical thinking in everyday decisions. Throughout this course, what impacted me the most was realizing that behind every statistic and every challenge are real people, real ecosystems, and real communities. In the case of biodiversity loss we studied in Papua, the environmental impacts and the consequences of climate change are not distant realities, they are happening now, in the present. Forests continue disappearing, species continue being threatened, and communities continue facing the consequences of decisions made far away from them. And I think this is kind of sad because these realities are often invisible or impossible for us to reach because we either chose to not see them or we see what social media and the news wants us to see. That's why we need to become more aware of what's happening around the world. We need to understand that these things that aren't probably affecting that are not probably affecting us directly, but we need to switch to this ethical perspective with where we need to take responsibility not only toward ourselves but also toward future generations and these communities that are most vulnerable to the environmental degradation, and also remind what SDGs want to tell us, for example SDG 13, SDG 12 or SDG 15, that aim to protect biodiversity, reduce emissions, and promote the responsible consumption. And personally, for me, what comes next is to keep applying these lessons in my daily life, in my academic life. That is why my message is simple. Stay informed, question what we consume, think critically about the information we receive, and remember that our decisions matter. I believe meaningful climate action requires both individual responsibility and systemic change. Governments, companies, professionals, and citizens all have a role to play. My commitment after this course is to continue applying these lessons in my daily life and future career, while encouraging others to do the same. People who are willing to listen, people who are willing to question, people who are willing to act. And for me, that is what agency means. And that is the lesson I will take and share beyond this course. Thank you.